I promised you I was going to share some dirty tricks in watercolor, so we're going to go right into that. And what we're going to talk about today is just I'm going to share with you why I never clean my palette. And you may agree with me, you may not, and that's okay because there's no firm rules with watercolor. When I first started painting, I had instructors that would tell me never do this, never do that, always do this, and that's very limiting when you're learning. And while sometimes these rules are there to help us to master technique and become better painters, comes a time, I think, when we want to rebel and we say, we've been told this and it's limiting me. Why don't I break that rule and see how it goes? And just because I say this is how I do it doesn't mean that you should feel like this is the way it has to be done. So I want to encourage you with that. And I'm just going to move my camera right over to my work surface and we'll get started. Just bear with me for a second. And hopefully that's all centered on, yeah, well, it's a little bit angled goofy so it doesn't look straight. So then I gotta tweak it a little bit. Okay, I think that's gonna have to be as good as it gets for today. I'm gonna see if I can switch a light on, brighten things up a little bit. Thank you for the anniversary greetings, folks. Okay, so I have two brushes here. Both of them are made by Princeton, and Princeton provided these brushes to me to try out and use. I already know that I like Princeton art brushes, watercolor brushes. So the only difference in these is I think they are two different lines. One is the Princeton Elite and the other is the Princeton 4050R. Mostly I've been buying the Neptune brushes, and each of these brushes, they make them at different price points and with slightly different materials. And of course, what makes a brush stand out is what they use in the bristles there, whether they're synthetic or natural or a mix, and then just how much time and quality they put into them. So I thought I'd play with both of these today and just see how they feel. When you have a new brush, I just want to let you know, because I think this is something we like to think that, oh, we've got these nice little tubes and they'll protect the bristles. After I'm done painting, I'll put it back on. But I really encourage you not to do that, because the risk is that when you're sliding that back on, you're going to grab a couple little brush hairs and bend them backwards. And when they have been bent backwards against this metal ferrule, they don't ever really want to go back and join the rest of the bristles again. So throw these away. You don't need to keep them. You can invest in a brush holder that just keeps your brushes nice and flat. Or if you're painting mostly in the studio, just store them upright in a pencil cup and that will work just fine. New brushes, of course, always have a little bit of binder in them to keep them nice and firm. So you want to also rinse that out before you get started, just in water, and swish them back and forth just a little bit to get that gluey, I think it's gum arabic that they put in. So just swishing it back and forth to get it nice and soft. And actually, if you can try out a brush in the store with a little cup of water, you'll get a better feel for how it reacts. And a good art supply store should let you do that. So over on the side here, you see my palette. And actually, I think I'm going to switch that light off because there's quite a glare. And I think you'll see better how grubby my palette is if I have the light off. Okay, what you're seeing here is two of my Reeves large plastic palettes, and this is the palette that I use most of the time, all the time. And I have a whole bunch of them because I love trying out different colors. And while I don't use them all when I'm painting, it's nice to have them all nearby. And in the middle, we have 5 different mixing areas. And this palette I've actually had since my very first watercolor class way back in 1994, I think. So it's over 20 years old. And as you can see, it's definitely looking a little weathered, but it works just fine. And I have the colors in basically the exact same layout that I had them in originally when I first started painting. My red over here, my yellow over here. I've got some blue, my violet, and my very dark colors, which actually, I think if I could do this again, I wouldn't put my Sodalite Genuine, which is a very dark black blue. Beautiful color, and my Paraline Green, which is a very rich dark green. I don't think I'd put them side by side because I do often get mixed up when I'm painting and trying to keep my flow and paint swiftly, and here are these two colors that look the same in the palette, so I have to kind of pay attention. And then over here I have Phthalo Turquoise, which should actually be with the blues, but of course when you add a new color to your palette, it doesn't always fit in the color wheel space. And then as I'm painting, a lot of the time I'm just dipping right into the colors and going right onto my paper to mix right on my paper. And so, you know, I might grab, we were just talking about Phthalo Turquoise, so I might grab some Phthalo Turquoise, and I love that color because it's so vibrant and rich. But then, you know, I want to make it a little more interesting, so I'm going to add some other colors, maybe some Opera. And this number 10 brush is actually a little bit smaller than I would ordinarily use for this size of paper. And of course, then they're starting to blend on the paper. Dot in that Opera. And then with Phthalo Turquoise, it's a greenish blue. And so if I wanted to make it maybe a little less vibrant, a little duller, I might want to add a reddish orange, which would be the kind of complementary other side of that. And that's a transparent orange. And you can see it's got a lot of push to it. Some colors are really high dispersing, where you drop it in and it starts to push the other colors away. But where it mixes with the turquoise, you're going to get a muddier neutral color. And I almost could maybe go a little bit more red, another high dispersing color. And that's my term. I don't know if that's actually a technical term, but that's how I describe colors that have that push. You dot them in and they whoosh across the page. And so I'm getting this beautiful, lovely neutral. And I'm going to get back to my palette in a second, but I wanted you to see that, you know, often I'm using my paper as my palette, and as things are nice and moist here, I can just start to play and let the colors play and see where they go. And this is turning into this very neutral color. It's much more complex than just putting straight phthalo turquoise and letting it dry. And that's why I love mixing color on the palette, because you get a very complicated mix. But over here in my palette, I do sometimes need just a wash of a simple color. You can't have complicated mixtures of color all the time. And so that's when I might mix in my palette. And in this palette over here, you see this big purple chunk, which is actually a tube of paint that arrived completely dried out. And well, the company that I ordered it from was of course kind enough to replace it for me. They let me keep that dried up tube, and I just threw it right on my palette, and I've been using it. As soon as, with watercolor, you're not wasting anything, you just re-wet it. And I've been loving using this beautiful cobalt violet. I use it in almost everything. It's just so pretty. And so I just threw that on my palette there. But everything else is a color that was pulled off the edge of the palette and put into those mixing wells. And you get a really, you know, you have that room then to mix a new color. And then what I find is, because I don't clean my palette, I just can, well, for one thing, I'll take a break between a painting session. I'll start a painting, I'll do a layer of the first layer of the painting, and I'll walk away. And when I come back, I want to use the same colors I started with. So of course I wouldn't clean my palette while I was in the middle of a painting. And then as I'm working, you get this beautiful consistency in your painting, because you know, maybe I was painting, let's see here, this is kind of blue. So maybe I was painting a sky area, and I had mixed a kind of a gray blue because it's a stormy sky. And then when I moved on in my painting, I want to do water down below. Well, it's going to reflect the sky, so it needs some of that same sky color. So I'm going to use the same mixture in this new area of my painting. And I might just tweak it a little bit, make it a little bit different, maybe make it a little darker blue, maybe add a little bit of violet, and I start to get the same, it's the same mix of colors, it's just modified a little bit. And so you get this beautiful consistency in your colors that makes your painting have harmony. It doesn't look like a rainbow. It kind of has this unity throughout. And when you've been doing that for a while, everything in your palette starts to get this murky, kind of muted, toned down grayishness to it. It's all these colors that are mixed in the palette really start to get dull. And if you're like me and you can't stand to waste a color, you might go, oh, I'm painting something that's over here is kind of an orangey brown. So I'm painting a fall scene and I'm going to use some leaf colors. So I've already got this mixed up. I might as well use it in this new painting. But, or I might say, oh, I know that the opposite of orange, the complement of orange is blue. So maybe I'll get a nice gray if I add a little bit of blue to this. And so you start to end up with everything in here being that muted, dull color. And that one of my artist friends called it palette dirt. And I love that term, palette dirt, because it's like, it really is. It's kind of grungy. It's kind of murky looking. And yet there can be some real beauty in the color mixtures you get in your palette dirt. And we can use them often in our paintings because most paintings can't stand alone on these pure intense colors that are around the edge of our palette. We need those neutrals to balance out our scene. And so here in the mixing wells, if you're not washing your palette, you start to get those neutrals building up. And so as much as I love to mix on my palette these complicated mixes, or mix on my paper, sorry, when I go to my palette, I have ready made some nice calm neutrals that will offset and balance out the rich, vibrant colors and make them seem even more rich and vibrant just by adding in some neutrals that are already waiting for me in my palette. So I love that. And this turquoise is just going to look even better as I start to offset it with some neutral color. And those neutral colors are made up of so many other colors from your palette that they really kind of fit well with almost anything you're going to do because, yeah, those colors are already in there. So you have that same harmony that you might have thought you could only get by mixing those original colors you were just painting with. Now I want to show you something else you can do with your palette dirt. If you're not a huge neutral fan, there's another thing I like to do, and that is to use my palette dirt to sketch with. And I'm going to switch brushes now and give that other Princeton brush a try. And I have here a reference photo. This is a mountain scene that I photographed when we were traveling in Waterton National Park, which is in the southern Alberta. And what I want to do is I want to take this reference photo and I want to transfer it onto my paper. And actually I better flip this over because it's gotten kind of grungy. And I like to just clip my paper down. This is a 300-pound Arches cold press. And because it's 300 pounds, it's nice and thick. So it doesn't tend to buckle much. I managed to cut it crooked, which is why it looks a little bit wonky. But for a sketch, that doesn't matter too much. I always like to give myself a nice margin around my paintings so that I can frame it easily without worrying about cutting off something. Or if my paper wasn't cut quite straight, which happens more often than you'd think, I can easily enough, crop it later. So what you can do is just take your kind of neutral gray that you've got it sitting in your palette anyhow, you don't want it to go to waste, and just use that to start to map out your painting rather than using a pencil and having to deal with pencil lines. You can start to kind of see what's in your scene. I'm going to start by painting just quickly I'll move that over here. Since we're not using the pure colors, I can cover them up. And scooch over a bit more. There we go. And just start to find the shapes in my scene so that I can establish the placement of everything, because I find when you're doing a landscape, you want everything to be positioned right or your whole painting's going to fall apart and not look believable. And so using my neutrals, I can paint something that can be covered up by more vibrant colors or more neutrals as I complete my painting. And I'm just first seeing the rocks and so forth in my scene. I might decide to use a slightly different palette dirt neutral. I've got some kind of greenish puddles, so maybe I want to use those for my trees. So I have the advantage over pencil sketching by being able to use neutrals to sketch, but use a slight bit of color in those neutrals, so I have a little bit more information that will guide me as I work on successive layers of the painting. And what I like about this too is we're working light enough so that I can change it. And anytime you're working, you're working pale, you're working loose, and the looser you are, the easier it is to tighten up and change things as you get those details ironed out. So it's very freeing to start out loose because it's very easy to get too tight early in your painting. And if you start out painting really detail oriented, really tight, it's almost impossible to get looser after that. And I'm getting this lovely, and it looks actually a little extra pale on the camera here, but I'm getting this very pretty, very neutral scene just coming to life before me. And to me, it's much more interesting than trying to create a pencil sketch and work from that sketch. And going with a kind of a blue-gray that I found in my palette dirt to now establish where the mountains are. And I don't know that I'm doing this in the right order because everything's very wet right now. It's all going to blend together. You could work from the back to the front. I like to start by painting the most important things and then kind of painting around them, because in my landscape style I'm realizing more and more that it's not important to paint every detail that you see. You want to give a sense, for me I want to give a sense of place and a little bit of this feeling of kind of being there, where when you're in a scene you can't look at 4 or 5 things at a time. You kind of look in one direction, you take it in, and then you look in another direction. And in my paintings I like focusing on one detail of the scene, and everything else kind of goes to the background. And yeah, liking that. And I'm going to ignore the sky altogether because I don't think I want a palette dirt sky. I don't want my sky to be too muted. When I actually go in to build up this scene, I would make the colors nice and clear and blue. But here in my landscape, you can get away with a lot of neutrals. So I hope that gives you an idea of another way you can kind of clean your palette as you go. Now there are a few times, I did say I never clean my palette, but there are a few times when I just need to mix a new fresh color, and so I will, just take a piece of paper towel and wipe out one area to work in. And there's nothing wrong with doing that if you absolutely need a place to mix. That's really your only choice. But I love the fact that when I'm using what's already in my palette, I'm not wasting paint. I'm getting interesting neutrals that I can't, that I might not think to mix on my own. And they look really beautiful together. I love the little hints of color that are in my scene, and I'm looking forward now to building up more details and completing this scene with the information that kind of pulls everything together that I was able to create in my little sketch here. Okay, I'm going to move over to the chat box and take a look and see if you guys have any questions for me. And because I think I'm basically done in this corner over here. Regarding these 2 brushes, they're both brand new, so I really didn't see a big difference in how they act together. Slightly different in shape, but really using them both, I felt comfortable with them both. Where a brush really gets tested is how it reacts over time. And so, you can't really make a lot of decisions about a brush just using it once. You want to see how it looks in a month or 2. And so I'll hang on to these and keep using them and then see how they hold up. And really test them out. Whoops. There we go. Just thought I'd pop up the reference photo one more time while I move my camera over. really want to fit in the way it's supposed to. If you can ever visit Waterton National Park, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful little park. And I say little, there's lots to see, but when we were there anyhow in May, it just has a lovely homey feel because it wasn't so crowded as some of the more well-known national parks. So I really loved it. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the chat box over here and see if you guys have questions for me. There we go. And lots of comments. I love seeing you guys interacting with each other, even though I can't pay attention to the chat while I'm teaching here. I also want to encourage you to take a look in the description of the video down below, because I have always supply lists just sharing the things that I've used in the lesson and any other helpful hints that I might have. If you found some of this, sometimes the stuff about palettes and brushes and stuff, these little tips, they're kind of overlooked, I think, when artists are teaching. We tend to go straight to the big artistic lessons. And so if you're finding this kind of new painter advice to be helpful, I do have more information like that in my online classes. I have a beginner bundle, which is 2 courses, and I have a link for 20% off that course down in the description. I also have just some different courses geared toward helping beginning painters find their own style, loosen up in painting, and just tackle new subjects with more confidence. I really think that if we love our watercolor journey, we're just going to get better and better because it's just this wonderful addiction. So yeah, over to your questions. Scrolling, reading. Ian says, my palette is a place of scientific interest because there's things growing in it. Maybe you're not using it enough. Actually, when I lived overseas in a humid climate, but palettes do have a tendency to get moldy. I actually had cockroaches eat my paints once when I was a teenager, and they left little multicolored droppings. That's how I knew it was them. So you never know. Then you kind of have to go to special lengths to protect your palette and keep it nice and dry. Okay, regarding my paint, most of the paints I used today were made by Daniel Smith. And feel free to check in on my watercolor workshop Facebook page if you guys want to continue the chat after. You can always ask me questions there as well. I love seeing those of you who are so knowledgeable about pigment colors and so forth. I'm kind of just squeeze it out and use it. So I appreciate those of you who are willing to share the different pigment numbers and so forth. Very helpful. Quinacridone magenta, Joe mentions it's really a beautiful color. Someone else got me onto Holbein's bright rose, although I haven't checked the light fastness rating of it. But if you're concerned about the opera pink, you could check out something like that. Yeah, palette dirt is really wonderful for shading. Anytime you have a bright saturated color and you want to tone it down a little bit, throw some of that palette dirt in. How long do my brushes last? How many miles do I get out of them? That's a good question. I haven't really measured. I tend to, like my favorite brush, my Escoda Versatile number 10 rigger, I tend to keep 4 or 5 of them on hand, and so I'm never just using one. I might use, I have 2 in my pencil cup in the studio right now. So, but I do plan to get at least several months out of a brush, if not longer. And then usually I'm afraid to throw it away because I just have an emotional attachment to all my brushes, so that I'll keep it even though I don't actually use it. Joe, you've asked about my 2017 calendar. It is still available on my, not on my own website, but it's on lulu.com. And if you do a search there, or if you go to my website at angelafehr.com, you should be able to track down a link to it. I can throw one in the video description as well. Thank you for asking. I have another video that just came out today. It's on YouTube. It's reviewing a light tablet made by DB Meyer. And I have a discount code and then just a little bit of a tutorial on some ways to use the light tablet in your watercolor painting. So you can feel free to check that out. Wayne comments that I find when doing shadow or shaded areas that black overpowers it. A nice neutral gray is a much better option. Wayne, I very wholeheartedly agree with you here. There's very little true black in nature. Black tends to really clash in watercolor because it has this quality of absorbing light, and we want beautiful transparency and kind of reflecting light in our watercolor. So black kind of defeats that purpose, and because it's so different than the other colors, it kind of tends to stick out like a sore thumb. So I encourage you to try to see other colors, like deeper colors, see more and exaggerate those little hints of colors that you see. I realized once, a few years ago, one day I was looking around and I realized I saw purple everywhere. And up until that time, I just hadn't even noticed that there were little hints of purple in the shadows and in the grasses and just all around me. And now I use purple like every day in my painting. So when you start to try to see more, like more depths to color, and photographs can really do a disservice because when we look at a photograph, it tends to flatten those shadows. And so a dark shadow does seem black to us, whereas if you were sitting there in that environment and seeing that dark shadow, it would be much more complex, it would be richer, and you'd see maybe tones of blue or a rich violet or a deep green. And so, you know, when we start to look for that and understand that, then we're much more free to use complex colors and to mix creatively. Wayne's given good advice to Linda, buy the best paper that you can afford. I do encourage that. I used two different kinds of paper today. I used by Arches 300 pound, which is probably the most expensive watercolor paper on the market. So if you feel like you can't afford it, I do recommend also Indigo art paper. They're 300 pound. The 140 isn't quite as nice in my opinion, but their 300 pound cold press is really fun to work with because of the way the pigment just kind of plays on the surface and mixes beautifully. And there are quite a few other really excellent artist quality watercolor brands out there, depending on where you live. Some are easier to source than others. I love seeing your comments here and the way you guys help each other out, especially those of you who live far away. You know, if you're giving sources in the UK to other students from the United Kingdom, that really is so helpful. So thank you for doing that. And yes, if you missed the broadcast and you're just tuning in now, you can watch this video. It will be live on my website or on YouTube for a week. And then after that, it goes unlisted. So that means if you have the direct link, like if you received the email from me this morning on my mailing list, you'll be able to still access it. And if you email me and ask me nicely if there's a video you're looking for, I can usually send you a link as well. I appreciate you guys joining me today for this live lesson. It's been fun to get back to. It feels like, oh, my life has restarted again because I'm doing my live video lessons. I have a lot planned for 2017. I'm in the middle of working on a course I'm calling holiday, or what did I call it? Holiday vacation or something. It's basically, it's a tropical theme, which I had hoped to release around Christmas, but just with the holidays, we got too busy. But the idea here is just kind of being able to paint some tropical themes, kind of a vacation idea. And so that will be coming out very soon, I hope. And then I have some big plans for other things that will be available on my site as well this year. And so just keep tuning in, I guess. Feel free to check in on my website, angelafehr.com. Join my mailing list because I do try to just share as much of my watercolor light bulb moments as I can, just to encourage you. I know it feels good to know we're not alone in this journey of trying to master this beautiful and unpredictable and sometimes infuriating medium. So thank you for joining me. If I missed a question from you, please go ahead and email me or leave a comment under the video and I'll try to get to that as well. So have a great day, and I'm finding the stop button. Wishing you guys all the best for January and for 2017.